think is interesting is that even though now the data protection regulation is almost adopted, clearly the discussion is not over for a number of reasons. The first reason is that the regulation now will have to be implemented. There's a 2-year transition period, and that this will require a lot of work. First, because industry sectors will have to develop new codes of conduct, for example. They will have to figure out how to implement the reform, and that's very important because, as I said before, European policymakers recognize that the text is not perfect, and therefore they will rely on codes of conduct to make sure that it applies well to specific business sectors. And secondly, the Commission will also have to draw up guidelines directed at data protection authorities to specify how the reform is going to be implemented, and they will have to set up the new European Data Protection Board. So there's still a lot of work in that respect. Another important point is that the Commission will now propose a reform of the e-privacy directive. The e-privacy directive is the only example of vertical data protection regulation or data protection legislation in Europe. And what is strange, I find, is that even though the Commission wanted to have a horizontal reform of the 1995 Data Protection Directive, it did not include the e-privacy directive in its reform. So now we will have to, we maintain vertical rules for one specific sector, which is the telecom sector, and we will have to adjust these rules to the new European Data Protection Regulation. And I wonder exactly what the justification for that is, but in any case, there will be a lot of political debates around it, in particular around the level playing field between telecoms operators and the so-called over-the-top services, so the online service provider. The third interesting point I find is that when you speak to business representatives, even though they see that the data protection regulation is now almost adopted, they don't seem to believe that this is the end of the EU data protection debate, and in particular of the debate of finding the right balance between, on the one hand, data protection requirements, and on the other hand, new business models based on data processing. The best example is big data business models. When you speak to business representatives, they seem to think that despite the new rules with the data protection regulation, there is still a need to clarify or to improve the balance between the needs of big data business models and data protection rules. So I think that actually the debate is not over, and that in the coming years we will see new questions emerging that will require further adjustments of the EU framework.